welcome. We're so happy to have you. My name is Maddie Duke, and on behalf of ABA Technologies, I want to thank you for being here today. At ABA Technologies, we help small and medium companies who have specific performance problems by making sure that employees know what to do and by making sure they do it. So in the context of today's webinar, we are specifically talking about RBT professional development. A little bit about our presenter, Adam Hockman. He is the Senior Vice President of Learning Partnerships and Growth at ABA Technologies. As one of our instructional designers, Adam focuses on integrating innovative and educational technologies and instructional design methods into our expanding range of products. Adam plays a pivotal role in building learning and performance systems, as well as corporate training programs that enhance professional capabilities. His background includes valuable work developing educational technologies in private school settings and for pediatric cancer patients. Without any further delay, I'll pass it to Adam and we can get started.
Sounds good. Thanks, Maddie. And welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you here for our webinar. And this time, we're going to be focusing more on the other side of what happens after the 40-hour training for RBTs, and that's on the professional development requirement that's new with 2026. So we're going to do a brief review of that and recap some of the things we've talked about in previous webinars. All of our previous webinars are archived on our YouTube page. If you search ABA Technologies on YouTube, as well as if you signed up for the webinar, if you see us on LinkedIn, we frequently post about the webinars. We're trying to do one every month. And so the last three that we've done are all on YouTube, and I encourage you to go ahead and take a look, especially if the 2026 requirements, which are right around the corner, it is September. If you haven't started planning, it's not that it's too late to start planning, but you need to really plan really quickly because they are almost here and you need to implement them for that January 1, 2026 date. So go back and watch our very first webinar from May when we went over those requirements. And then each one that followed has been on some aspect of training and training systems, specifically on RBTs, although we do work across the career lifespan. One of the things that I'm really excited that we are launching, this is sort of the soft launch announcement, is a clinical leaders community. And this is a place, we're going to be launching this in the next couple of months. If you scan this QR code, you can sign up in our registration form. Maddie's also going to drop a link to it in the chat. It's going to be a very reasonably priced community that is going to be a professional learning space for people who are on the clinical end and are focused on training and performance systems. So that could be an owner of a small clinic that oversees training. It could be a clinical director who has splits their time being a CD and also doing training. It could be a trainer. This community is not exclusive to BCBAs. It's anybody who's overseeing the design and implementation of training programs. And what we plan to do, as you can see in that screenshot there, is there are going to be different ways to interact with people that are in the community, and myself and other people from ABA Technologies and other people, guests that we bring in, are going to be facilitating a lot of relevant conversations about doing training in ABA. There's a lot that's changing in compliance related to the BACB, as well as the entire landscape of autism service delivery. And we know that there are very few dedicated spaces about training, specifically ABA. There are different communities you can go to for other topics like burnout or supervision, but not so much with training. And so what we plan to do in this community is we're going to price it at $150 for a year. Out of that, you'll get 16 continuing education credits and potentially more. And it will all be on things related to behavior-based instructional design and training. We're going to have a bunch of different tools, member-only webinars and discussions, workshops, roundtables with professionals. We've got a guest speaker series that we're planning to launch through the community, journal clubs, as well as open office hours where you can come and ask us questions. We're also going to do some training critiques where you bring a piece of training, we provide some feedback on it, or we work on building something together. So I'm hoping it's going to be a really vibrant community. I've been looking forward to the idea of starting this for a long time. And I think that as I've continued to meet folks through our free learning consults, which I'll post here. These learning consults where we've met and talked to you about training issues or getting ready for the 2026 requirements. What I've learned from a lot of you is that you're in small and mid-sized companies where you are looking for this kind of expertise, but maybe you can't engage with us in a custom engagement like we have for larger companies. So the goal of the clinical leaders community is to give you a slice of that. So speaking of three free 30-minute learning consults, we're still doing these. Scan that QR code, and that has the form for the clinical leaders community at the bottom of it. It's got a link to that Calendly, and Maddie will also drop a link to the Calendly in there. But you can bring yourself or your entire training team. I've met with people who are just starting a clinic. I've met with people that are scaling a 1 or 2 site clinic, or people in a mid or large size company who are trying to understand the implications of the 2026 requirements, or they're looking to find a new 40-hour training or how to align their 40-hour training with instructor-led training, all those kinds of things. It's very you driven. So you bring the topics. I don't really have any topics except for to listen to what you want to talk about, and then we work through it. Another exciting thing coming very soon, later this month, is the ABA Compliance Podcast with two of my favorite people in ABA, Michael Fabrizio and Rose Fedek. We just recorded the intro episode, and then there's going to be an episode. Their first episode is going to be out in early October. And we are hosting the webinar. They are part of ABA Compliance Solutions, and they work on a variety of compliance topics for people that are in small and mid-sized companies. And I think there's a lot to learn from them. I know I've learned a lot from their conference presentations and workshops in the past, but I'm really excited to have two people talk about what can be, a snooze of a topic, compliance. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. It's going to be in our newsletter. It's also going to come up if you follow us on Apple Podcasts. You'll see the Operate Innovations. It's going to come up as a podcast option there. We also have a 40-hour training. We sell it off the shelf, meaning you can buy seats. Some people I've met with are onboarding only a couple of RBTs every 6 months or a year. Woohoo, that's very good for you. It means that you probably have your very stable retention. Okay. Other folks are doing it at a much higher volume. And they need options to create kind of what we've been talking about in these past webinars, which is not having people forcing people through a 40-hour training and then stacking a bunch of instructor-led content on top of that, but actually to bring those two together. I was just out in Atlanta 2 weeks ago, and one of the things I heard from technicians was, oh, you have to get through the 40 hours and then you get to learn to do the work. Which means, and this is not just from that one location, this is from many people that we talk to, technicians that when we interview them 3 months, 6 months out, or people who've moved from a technician to a behavior analyst role, they see the 40 hours as something you have to get through. The where you learn to do the work is in the instructor-led training, the in situ practice. Well, that doesn't have to be the story. You can actually bring together the 40-hour training, make it something that involves some of the maybe modules that are delivered online, as well as some training that's delivered in person, and that's tailored to your procedures, tailored to your client populations, your team structures, and so on. So we have that product available, as well as a product I'm going to talk a little bit about today, which is called ProTech. And this is a product that's meant to help people meet the professional development requirement. Okay, it's meant to give the upfront learning piece. It's little snapshots of learning, micro learnings on things like verbal behavior, error correction, prompting, managing problem behavior, graphing, and data collection professionalism skills. It's all these various topics that may come up in the 40 hours, but now we need to either review them or extend them. And these are very short 15, 20-minute lessons that people go through. And then you add other types of things to that initial event. So for example, in prompting, we've got a whole prompting course sequence, short little episodes that teach review types of prompts, stimulus and response prompts, go over prompting procedures, go over prompt delays, what it looks like in a program, what if a learner's getting stuck with the prompt you're using, all those kinds of things that happen when you are actually prompting. And then what you do is use our supervisor and learner workbooks, and those help you talk about and review those topics when you're doing supervision. so that it's not a training that people complete and then 3 months later they're trying to apply it, but it's that we've talked about stimulus prompts and now we're going to go look at Johnny's program and where we're using stimulus prompts and we're going to clean up the way that you're using those. Okay. So I'm going to talk about that in a bit, but that is a product that can help you very easily meet the new recertification requirements, which is what we're going to talk about next. This is a review from our very first webinar, and I'm only going to do a very small review on the requirements. And in the chat, if you're willing, you can say, yes, I have reviewed the BACB's documentation about training, or you can say, no, I haven't. And if you haven't, or you can just think this to yourself and you don't want to share with the group. If you haven't, you need to read it now because there's a lot of information in there about what's required in 2026. Okay. So I'm only going to review the PD requirements, professional development or / continuing education. Okay. So PD. Previously, RBTs were required to have an annual completion of the competency assessment. And now that's been replaced with ongoing professional development on a 2-year cycle. Okay. This is really great news. I know it's a lot more work for organizations to implement this potentially. Some places already have continuing ed going on. It's a little bit more work for organizations, but it's much, much better for the discipline. Okay. It's much better that people are getting opportunities to review and extend important concepts, principles, and practices than having to complete a competency assessment, which once you're already assigned on a case, maybe some of that may be irrelevant or maybe things that are so fine-tuned to your organization that the comp assessment doesn't really do it. Okay. But the continuing ed component can. Over the course of the 2-year cycle, technicians have to obtain a certain number of continuing ed or professional development units, PDUs. You'll hear me say that several times. And there are some of the requirements of who can deliver it and what can be in the PDU. This summer, in July and August, the BACB released 2 additional documents that are on some of those in-service training requirements. Okay. This is an important one because it tells you what qualifies as acceptable and unacceptable content. Okay. Now, not every professional development experience, which is what we're going to talk about today, counts toward the PDUs that are going to be for BACB credit. Okay. And that's totally fine. You still need to deliver professional development outside of those that count toward CEs or PDUs. Okay. But not all of them are going to count. So they've gone ahead and given you some examples and non-examples of those, as well as what are the formats. Okay. In what format is it acceptable to do a passive lecture? Is it acceptable to count people creating training materials as something that is a qualifying event? Is it acceptable for an event that uses behavioral skills training? All of those types of things. And then it talks about the requirements for the person delivering the qualifying event. Then they released another document, which is not just on PD, but is about this transition period. Okay. Because we're running out of time. It's almost January 1. And this goes over those requirements for 2026. So I encourage you to take a look at those, plus the newsletter, plus our very first May webinar where we talked about, my colleague, Dr. Danielle LaFrance, talked about the requirements for the 2026. Okay. All right. The big ideas related to the BACB's requirements for professional development are that they need to include active and meaningful responding, whether that's in-person delivery, as in an instructor is delivering it to a group, a trainer's working one-on-one or one-on-two, or whether it's like you're using something, an asynchronous course like our ProTech product, where we've got question and answers, there's scenario videos, they collect data. It's a really sharp product. Okay, so in the RBT, in professional development activities, it cannot be passive. Okay. And we're going to talk in a moment why there's different considerations for delivering RBT level professional development than delivering BCBA professional development. Okay. So that's one piece. The second piece is that we use the same units for conversion. 25 minutes equals 0.5, 50 equals 1. So if you're an ACE provider, those should be, or you're collecting CEs, those should be familiar to you. The other thing that's a big idea is that the PD event can be, the PD experiences, they can be review and extension of core concepts, principles, and practices, okay? Whereas some requirements are for, at the BCBA level, that they are extensions of things that are on the task list. Here we get to do review of things. And that's really important because when you're slamming people with a 40-hour training up front, especially in organizations that have people go through a full 40 hours before they ever observe or work with a child, or whatever the client population is, then there oftentimes almost a lot of that stuff, unless it's directly on that client's program, is going to get lost. Okay, because it's really not meaningful to them. They don't know why they're learning preference assessments. They don't understand what the results of an FBA help them do in practice and so on. Okay, so it allows for the review of those topics and extension of those topics, advanced applications, if you will. Okay. Now, that's the BACB stuff. Okay. Now this is sort of our stuff moving forward. Okay. You can easily meet the BACB requirement by putting together professional development units, delivering them, tracking people going through them, all of that, yada, yada, yada. But it's better for you to design them in a way that's actually going to improve or enhance technician performance and satisfaction in the job. Okay. And there are different considerations about what we're going to talk about are the ingredients for designing a professional development experience. And there are different considerations as you do that. The first one I think that's really important is that technicians have very different learning histories. Okay. Whether they are a month into the job, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, or longer, they have different histories. Okay. The requirements that their job requirements are very different from those of a BCBA. Okay. When they're working with a client, there are so many things that they have to do where if the skill is not in their hands and the knowledge is not in their head, meaning they can't go reference a job aid in the moment, they're not going to be able to respond to a crisis situation. They're not going to be able to effectively prompt fade. Okay. All of the different skills that people have to learn and apply on client cases have to be done in the moment with precision. Okay. And because of that, that means that the things that we do in professional development need to provide relevant, realistic practice so that people can master those skills. This is different from a BCBA who's writing a treatment plan and can go back and look at old treatment plans they've written. They can consult a colleague who's written a treatment plan for a similar kind of profile, that they can go and look at a resource, review something in a textbook, read a journal article. They can go and rely on performance supports or job aids and other types of tools in their environment, and then come back and do the work. The pace, the rate of them responding in the moment isn't as much of a requirement as it is when you are a technician. So the job performance requirements are very different. The other reason that PD events need to be, have certain elements tied to them are because when people engage in the 40-hour training, it's a lot of content up front. Whereas when people go to graduate school to study behavior analysis over 2+ years, they are learning, often going through coursework at the same time as doing practicum experiences, and those two can work together. What I learn in this course can now be applied in this case. And maybe I'm going to learn some things on the job, but then I'm going to learn about it again and maybe some extension when I take another course. Okay. That's not true for a lot of the technicians that go through the 40-hour training. They complete it all up front, some having never worked in the population they're going to be working with, meaning they've never worked, let's say, if you're in autism services, they've never worked with an individual with autism. Maybe some people have even gotten into the profession. All they've done is during the clinical interview, they did an observation where they got to see a technician work with a child. Maybe they don't have a lot of experience working with children in general. Okay. And so they are slammed with a lot of stuff up front, and they don't get this kind of simultaneous learning through the flow of work as work is happening, getting feedback from a supervisor on an ongoing cadence, and then being able to pull from the 40 hours and so on. Okay. That's not the reality for a lot of organizations that are required in order to run services to have people have the RBT credential. So it puts you in a really tight spot. Okay, and that means that professional development needs to take that into account. Okay, that those things that they learned in the 40 hours may not have transferred to on the job. Okay, and too many behavior analysts that I talk to blame so many things on the 40-hour training. I mean, what else do you expect if you're going through 40 hours of training, of technical training on things you've never done before, using words you've never heard of before that may be used in other contexts in the world? what might you gather out of that? Even the best training, you cannot get everything that you need to know from it to be able to go and do the job, especially when you're applying it in settings where there's a lot of variability in how the learner is going to be responding. So you really need to think about that. The other thing that kind of gets under my skin is when behavior analysts say, well, I think we're going to do a training on X with the technicians because they're not doing it. Okay. They immediately make the assumption by just attending, a client session, participating in a supervision meeting, or looking at client data, that they know what technicians need. And not always is the problem that you see in the data, the problem that you see in the observation, the core problem. So if you don't create professional development experiences with the people who are going to receive them or going to benefit from them, you will miss the mark so much of the time, and you'll be dissatisfied with what happens on the other end. So I like the word co-design, co-create. I hope you co-create your professional development experiences with the people that are delivering services. Don't go in and say, well, my gosh, no one is taking trial by trial data accurately. We need to focus on that. If you don't go and ask people why they're not collecting continuous data, they may give you reasons that you would not have known had you just observed or had you looked at behavior on the other end of it. So this is looking at data. It's going and observing people in person, and it's also asking them for what they need and getting them to participate in the development of that. It'll help you not only land on a better solution, but it'll also have them engaged in the whole process. Okay. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about some logistics. What do you need to make sure you have in place to be able to do continuing ed or professional development? We're also going to talk about the ingredients of effective professional development experiences. Now, I'm going to talk about ingredients that make up a good kind of learning experience when people need to be able to learn and apply things on the job, when they need to improve their performance, when they need to be able to perform independently. That does not mean that everything I'm going to suggest applies, that every example I'm going to give would qualify as a PDU experience under the BACB's requirements. Okay. Whether you are working on clinical skills or you're teaching someone to use central reach, or you are working on operational deficiencies, or you're working on professionalism skills, some of those things may not qualify for professional development units, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't design them with the idea in mind that there are certain elements that are going to help people achieve that performance. Okay. So just know that up front. Let's start with some of the big points when you're starting your professional development system. The first one is you've got to develop a tracking system. Okay, I'm going to break down each of these 5 points. The first one's you've got to develop a tracking system. Okay, a centralized way to keep records so that when somebody gets audited, you can prove that they participated from start to finish in what you're saying they participated in. Now, at the BCBA level, this is often dependent on the individual professional. Okay, that the BCBA, they're responsible for their continuing ed. And I'm not saying that RBTs aren't responsible for it, but many RBTs that I talk to are not crystal clear that they actually hold a national certification. They are brought into their organization and they think it's a certification that is somehow connected with their organization. It's something that their organization is providing. Okay. So what I want to make sure of is that people don't say, well, they've got to keep track of it, because that's going to be really quite a mess. We can look at turnover data to tell us that that's going to be a big mess. To assume that RBTs are going to individually keep track of all the professional development events that they participated in. So if you make that assumption, you'll just, I think, add more liability on your end when you get audited. Okay. Every few months or so, maybe a 6-month check-in, I would look at how people are progressing toward the requirement. Okay. Are they going to be on track to meet those 12 units? If not, we need to intervene, because there are many things that can happen if you do live events, which is one of the reasons why you might do our ProTech product. Because then you can easily track in a learning management system whether people are progressing through the course. When you're doing a live event, I saw this 2 weeks ago when I was observing a live potty training that a BCBA was delivering to a group of technicians. Now, they weren't delivering for PDUs, but if they would have delivered it for PDUs, there were several things that happened. People arrived late to the session, but it had to keep going. It had to keep moving. Okay. There was a crisis situation and two techs had to leave before the event hit the 25-minute mark. Okay. So they would not be eligible for that zero point 0.5 credit. So you need to have a system to track both late arrivals, early departures from an event, and whether or not you're going to make those up. Maybe you have so many events going on throughout the year, you don't really have to worry about it because people are going to meet the 12 minimum very easily, okay, like in 3 months' time. But if that isn't the case, then you need to be able to track this and be able to quickly and easily prove that people have completed the training that they say they've completed. The second point, I already made this one a little bit ago, which was to understand what people want and need, not just what their performance is exactly telling you, as in, like, I can see that there is a skill deficit here, or I can pull my treatment fidelity data and I can look at that. But ask people, survey them, conduct focus groups, do a quick check-in at a supervision meeting. Tell them that you're going to start some professional development activities and what would they like to see the outcome of those be. Okay. It's not that if you notice that procedural fidelity is low on, let's say implementing error correction, it doesn't mean that you don't maybe have professional development experiences on error correction, but it might not be the thing you do this month. Maybe the thing you need to do this month is a workshop that's on, stress management, reviewing crisis management procedures. Okay. So think about this as an arc or a journey rather than just isolated events or topics that we can pull from. Okay. Think about what people are going to need now and what they can use. Go and observe them in practice. Don't just trust what's coming out as an aggregate score across technicians or programs in your data collection platform. Okay. I'd be very nervous to make those decisions based on what I've seen in practice. Look at client populations. Make sure that what you're focusing on in professional development is going to be easily applied in the setting that you're working in. Okay. You might go and say, oh gosh, we haven't done a whole lot on preference assessments or no one's running them. Well, preference assessment delivery might look different in an EIBI setting than it does in a severe behavior one. Make sure that what you're doing in terms of the examples that you provide, the practice opportunities, the feedback is related to the population they're going to be implementing it with. All right, tailor the PD event to different performer groups. Now, this is the one that I think some organizations are going to say, we have got to take the easy route. We're going to add PDUs to our schedule, but we're going to have PDUs for all RBTs. That is a big mistake. RBT1s, entry-level technicians, need very different professional development events and activities than lead RBTs, okay? Look at the PDUs meeting the BACB's requirement, not just as having a check on the page, but also as something that could already build in by meeting the compliance requirement. It can build in career pathways. Okay. How many of you raise your hand? I can't see any of you, but raise your hand. How many of you would like to see your RBTs stick around longer? Yes, you'd like to see them stay there. There are many, many RBTs that will become professional behavior therapists. And that is a beautiful thing. And we can do that by creating pathways for them. Okay. You may not have official roles or tiers within the organization, and that's fine. But tailoring PD events to different performer groups is one way that you can start to create that progression. Okay. Sometimes organizations we've worked with, they want to have that all laid out. They want to have job descriptions for every single level. They want to have criteria to move up or down a level. They want to have interview processes. And then they end up building this system over 6 or 9 months. When next month, when they're doing a PDU, they can have one on leadership for people who've been there for more than 6 months. And they can have one that's reviewing preference assessments for people who've just started. Okay. Integrate this and it becomes a tool for you. Okay. And our ProTech product helps you do that. All right. Make sure the training is mapped to their daily responsibilities, not something that's going to sit on the shelf. Okay. Not, I'm going to go over how to use these function-based treatments that none of our clients currently are using, but I'm just going to go ahead and use it as a PD event in case we get new clients that are going to use these particular treatments. Okay. No, try to use things that tomorrow, this afternoon, I can go and I can take what I did and I can go and implement it. Okay. It's going to be very easy for me to apply it on the job and get feedback from other people in the environment and especially from my learner. Okay, fourth major point. Balance your PD events. Whether they count for PDUs, they qualify for PDUs or not, do not set up clinical events that are like once every other month. And then during the off months, we're going to talk about operational things. Okay. That's when we talk about the learning progression, that lack of distributed and cumulative practice that happens over the course of a year. It's just you're going to see a lot of regression in skill, or you're going to conduct events that are one-offs that you go do nothing with. Okay. Um, Make sure that you balance it also with topics like professionalism, self-management skills. Some of those will be eligible for PDUs, others of them won't, but make sure that you balance them. Okay. Think again in terms of a year worth of time, okay, or the life cycle of the RBT, rather than thinking this month I got to do this topic and next month we got to do this topic and I won't be back around to clinical topics for 3 months. And the last one I've mentioned a couple of times is to create a journey, an arc for the year. Create a narrative that weaves together all these little episodes of learning. Okay. Every live instructor training, online course that you take, maybe in situ practice, a simulation or a role play, a video critique or a video review of an observation. Put all of these pieces together, both so people can see the story of how it all connects. Okay. They can find that common thread, and so that skills can stack. Many of or all of the skills in ABA, they're not linear. Okay. They build on one another. So if you learn about preference assessment and we build up your preference assessment skills in this month's event, and we start working on getting you some on the job opportunities to practice it, we give you feedback and so on. Then next month, let's extend it. Let's refine our prompting or error correction procedures. And we're going to get you to do that. And we're going to go back. You're going to run a preference assessment before you begin teaching. Okay. We're starting to connect all of these within individual skill domains and across the arc of the entire repertoire. We're building from complexity foundations, building that strong foundation, and then adding to it. Okay. So now that we've talked about some of the things that are related to the big points and logistics of just implementing a professional development program in the organization, let's zoom in on an individual experience. What are the ingredients that make for a good experience? This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that I think people do wrong most of the time. So that's where this list came from. Okay. These are the things that if you add these elements into a professional development unit or experience, you will do a whole lot better than setting a one-off event with some practice and then never touching it again. Okay. I'm going to talk through an example of using a multiple stimulus without replacement as the one example, and then I'm going to do a demonstration after we go through the ingredients. Okay. I'm going to go through each of these and they move in order. Okay. The first ingredient, I want you to imagine, rather than say a professional development unit, a PD experience. Okay. It's not a one-off. There are multiple events, multiple touch points in this journey where someone's going to learn to implement a multiple stimulus without replacement preference assessment. Okay. That's what I'm going to use as the example, but this could be applied to any number of skills. Okay. In that first contact, I want to make sure that there is scaffolded instruction and practice. Okay. And comes from those qualifying activities or delivery, like that includes behavioral skills training. And a framework I often rely on is methetics, okay, which was developed by performance psychologist Tom Gilbert in the 1960s. And it'll really jive with those who are heavy-handed into BST, okay? The goal of methetics is that it is sort of it's this recursive framework. You don't just move from one step to the next, but it's fluid. You go back depending on the learner's performance and then you move forward for providing a structured learning experience. Okay. You start in this case, MSWO, we're going to model the performance. I'm probably going to add verbal commentary over top of it. I'm going to highlight specific features. Maybe I'm going to use cue words like push the stimuli toward the learner, retrieve the items, take data, rearrange, retrieve, next trial. Okay. And you're going to maybe answer questions as I go through that demonstration. It could be a video demonstration. It could be a live demonstration. Live demonstrations are often hard because if you're the trainer and you're active in the demonstration, it can be very difficult to show the continuous nature of a procedure that's in a chain. Okay, you end up breaking many links in the chain to be able to provide the commentary. So that's why I like video demonstration. All right. Then the next step is guide. During the guided step, this is where we're going to set up some practice. The practice is not going to be on the very same example that I just showed you during the demonstration. This is one of the ways that BST falls down for people. Okay. They just choose one example and then they use it in every step of BST. Okay. In here, I've demonstrated on a novel example. I've highlighted the key features of implementing it. Now we're going to do some guided practice. And I'm going to set up leads and prompts. I'm going to ask you, for example, tell me what you're going to do next. Boom, now show me. Okay, I'm also going to prompt you. Maybe I move some of the items that are in the array so that you're ready for the next trial. And I keep going in the guided practice stage until I can release you without all of those supports. Okay, I can remove those supports. And now you're doing practice more on your own and you're getting better and you're getting better. And maybe you're answering questions in a heuristic, which would be like a decision-making tool. Okay. And now I'm going to then release you to a new novel example you haven't practiced. And we're going to do independent practice without all of my guides in there so I can observe how well you are, how well you're doing. And then I'm going to go back to guide if we need it. And then after this instructional episode, then I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to retest it. One way to retest is retest errors or where parts, difficult parts, or where I maybe saw you hesitant throughout the demonstrate, guide, and test components. Or I might retest it the next day or the next week and provide you immediate feedback on it. And all of these steps that I'm doing are going to be part of showing you a wide range of examples and non-examples. Okay. So in MSWO, I'm not going to show a demonstration with these 5 stimuli, and now you're going to go implement the same thing with those same 5 stimuli. I'm going to alter it. Maybe instead of 5, I add in 6, and they're all very different. Maybe we go from an items MSWO to a food-based MSWO. Okay. It's giving you opportunities to get exposure to the range of the class that you're going to be working in, and then getting practice with it, both at levels that are part of the demonstration, answering questions, guided practice where I provide supports, and then independent practice when you do it on your own. So I put this little visualization together to help us build the professional development experience. That methodic step, demonstration, guide, test, could happen in that first unit, that first contact. Maybe that's a Friday training. It's an hour and a half training where I've got all the RBTs together and we're going to go over it, or all the RBTs that are getting trained on this. Then the second piece is distributed practice. Distributed practice means that I've spaced out from when you have that first initial instructional contact. I've provided delayed practice opportunities. Okay. Space repetition so that you don't forget the skill. And again, I'm going to keep providing novel examples. I'm going to throw in common problems, like when the learner grabs 2 items from the array. What do you do then? When the learner engages in problem behavior during the assessment, what do you do then? I'm going to embed some of those in these practice opportunities. And I might spread the practice across in situ observations. We might do a role play during the supervision meeting, or we might have a follow-up event. At the next PDU, I'm going to start it by doing a verbal review where you're answering a lot of questions, or you're telling me the steps in the MSWO, or you're doing a free write. You're having to write down the steps of the MSWO. Okay. So those contacts are places where we get additional practice. Okay. And we also add in a lot of celebration and recognition for people getting it right, for people trying things that they were uncomfortable with, for technicians being really flexible with a new way of doing the procedure, whatever it might be. Okay. We're attaching celebration and recognition to each of these components. Okay. And through all of those distributed practice opportunities, I'm getting a good idea of where I might start having you do on the job practice opportunities. Real world opportunities for you to apply this skill. And for many cases, it will be, okay, you're going to apply it with the client that you're working with. If you're only working with one client in a half day, or maybe you're working with 2 clients, or in a group setting where you are coaching another technician and implementing whatever the skill is. Okay. I'm finding those on the job opportunities where you get to practice the things that we did in the initial contact, the methodics, and that distributed practice that happened. And there's some way that I can inspect that this has actually happened, whether that's you give me a permanent product like a data sheet, or maybe you fill out maybe it's a data sheet on the front, and on the back there's a reflection on what went well, what questions you have, if you'd like to see another model, those types of things. Maybe it's an in situ observation. I have the lead tech or a trainer go around the clinic, or go into sessions or look at video observations to give feedback. Okay. When you start doing professional development at the tech level, you need to make sure that supervisors and trainers are all wrapped into this. So many times when we work on projects, people that are working on like developing a new training, they'll say, "Oh my God, if we're going to implement this with techs, we're going to have to go retrain the BCBAs." And that's true. There are many procedures that people did not get a whole lot of practice with when they were going through their coursework, and it may be not used in practice across the range of programs and variability of their client population. So you are going to have to make sure that you're not putting an event out there or a skill out there that no supervisor is able to support. Okay. So in when we go and find on the job opportunities, now we've got opportunities. You're going to apply it to Luis's case and you're going to apply it to Sarah's case. And you're going to come back and check in with me, or I'm going to make sure that that we've added in supervision. We've wrapped supervision and coaching around it. Okay. And again, we're going to celebrate that. Some organizations, they'll have like if they use Microsoft Teams, they'll have a place where they can do shout outs. Okay. You might have small incentives that are in place. You might do shout outs during team meetings. You might have a bulletin board where people post things. All right. Ways to recognize people and to reward them going and implementing these procedures. Okay. And again, this is a very small skill. We're just talking about an MSWO, but it's enough that we can bite off that we can actually make a visible difference. So many professional development activities bite off way more than they can chew. And in the end, they get nothing out of them. They get a lot of nice ideas. They get a lot of things that they don't know how to do. They get a refresher on the literature, what's new in the literature, but not what am I going to go do tomorrow when I'm working on Sarah's case. So we want to wrap recognition and rewards around this. And it's not just because we want to encourage people to keep doing it and we want to reinforce their behavior of going and doing it. It's because it also socializes it in the environment. It normalizes that we go to professional development to learn things, to be able to do things. And then we go and do those things and we keep doing those things. Okay. So the fourth ingredient is to wrap supervision around it, whether that's supervision teaching supervisors the skill or reviewing how it goes. And there are a lot of professional development events. For example, if you're doing an MSWO or if you're teaching, let's say you're gonna really try to get BCBAs to write programs that include prompt delays. Make sure that during those training events, they demonstrate how to use that procedure. If there's no demonstration, it didn't happen. Okay. So it's not just I'm going to passively absorb that, oh, yeah, now we're writing this into programs, or here's a new checklist, or here's a new tool we're going to use. But can you actually do it? Can we do it in a role play? Okay. This is the part that can get kind of uncomfortable at the clinical director level. So anyway, BCBAs, they're wrapping supervision. You're creating the tools so that people, when they're going in there and working with cases, there are frameworks, there are procedural fidelity checklists they can use, there are feedback tools, there are worksheets they can complete. And we're normalizing both in that professional development activity and more broadly across the organization, reflection, troubleshooting, that what we learn in training will not go like that in practice. Okay. And also looking for variability. And by wrapping all of that around there, then it ensures that when you go and celebrate people completing these things and when they go and implement them, that you're careful not to alienate the group of RBTs that are working with far out cases. And what I mean by that is that if you're training everybody in the organization to use the same procedure, if we're all going to do a training on preference assessments, and I've got 90% of my techs are focused on Have got client populations where I showed those types of examples during the training. I've provided them relevant practice during supervision meetings or the morning meetings or follow-ups, that I don't alienate the 10% that are working with learners of very different profiles, where implementing it is not going to look the same at all. You need to help people translate, because where I've seen celebration and recognition, like shout outs, go wrong in meetings, is where you've got a group of people who are disgruntled because what you taught them does not work in practice with the population that they're serving. Okay. And you may not see that immediate effect, but that's one of the ways that your program can kind of break down a little bit. So you want to provide the supervision and structured debriefs in there, because those are going to help that when people go and implement it, whether they're implementing it with the population that you showed and practiced with in your initial training, or they receive additional supervision, that everybody's going to have roughly equal amounts of success being able to go and apply what you've shown them. Okay. And inside of that, let's add to our graphic, we've got that PDU. We've got the distributed practice in our dark blue boxes. And then when we put it on cases, we need supervision meetings and actual in situ coaching to help people apply the skills. And of course, celebration and recognition around that. Last ingredient is continued practice and extension. Create an experience and a journey that's going to allow for the stacking of skills. If you taught preference assessments this month, then next month we're going to move on to introducing, or in 2 months, we're going to focus more on error correction, or we're going to focus on increasing the number of learning opportunities that are happening per session. Make sure that you tie all of this together in some way. Okay. And when you start the next thing, do review, distribute your review, do some cumulative review of the previous skills that you've worked on through drills and refreshers, or maybe you do some of those video observations of people implementing the skill, and then help them extend it, help them look for new opportunities to apply it, so that the generalization of that will just continue to grow and grow and grow and grow. Okay. All right, and that's that last piece. We've got that practice extension. Okay. So inside of just working on multiple stimulus without replacement, we've got all of these components that are working together to increase the odds that what we do for professional development is not just a one-off that people are going to see one time and be done, but it is a continuous learning journey. Okay. And if you start adding these ingredients into professional development across everything that you're working on, or most things, most skills that you're going to work on, you're going to see a lot of transfer to things that you didn't teach. Okay. You're going to see these generative surprise outcomes that people learn to really deliver that MSWO very well. And the precision of delivering trials and the precision of collecting data and doing it with good pace, that has now transferred to them delivering discrete trials or finding naturalistic opportunities during play. Okay. All the skills start to relate and start to work on one another, and then you can draw from them. All right. So those are the big components of the professional development event. Now let's look at a case example. I talked about this one throughout, but I'm just going to show you now some materials from it. And I'm going to pull from a training that we've done that we custom built for a client. All right. So how do we select that event? Remember, before, we're co-creating this with technicians. What do they want and need? And what does the data tell us? Okay. And maybe we went around and asked supervisors. This doesn't have to be labor intensive. I can ask supervisors at a meeting. When was the last time anyone implemented a preference assessment around here? Okay. I could go and ask techs. Tell me items and activities your client is using in session that function as reinforcers other than an iPad. Then I could go and watch people. Tell me about an MSWO. Can you do it with me? Can you run it with this client? Okay. It can be very brief sampling, and you can gather a whole lot of information that can help you then design the experience. And the experience may be focused on these two key performance objectives. If I give a technician that goes through this PD experience a 6-item scenario, you've got 6 items, here's an MSWO data sheet. I want them to set it up and be able to conduct it in a role play setting with 100% procedural fidelity. Okay. While managing some of the common issues that come up when delivering trials-based preference assessments. Maybe this is the second one. This is an extension of that I might focus on in the distributed practice. Given a 5-minute teaching session, I want them to rotate through preferences that were identified during the MSWO as reinforcers. Of course, I want them to be able to implement the preference assessment, but then I want them to go use those things that ranked high in the results. Okay. So we design that experience around those outcomes in mind. Okay. That people are actually able to do the skill, not describe the skill, but do the skill. Okay. And I'm going to show you a bit of what that early phase might look like. What might that initial PD event look like? How might it apply methetics? If we were in a room together, I would be using choral responding and have you say the answers together aloud. But all right, you're going to be my technicians. All right, everybody, we're going to be reviewing preference assessments. We're going to review the MSWO today. Here we go. These are the steps of the procedure that we're going to be implementing. Some of you are familiar with this, but this might be new to others of you. Go ahead and take a little read of it. They're reading along, and I'm describing it. All right, here's our first example. Go ahead and set up your data sheet to look like mine. Okay, this is the demonstration portion. Okay, I'm going to do video demonstration, and they're going to collect data on it. All right, here we go. Ready for the first trial? The technician has the array set. You can see it right in front of her. They're going to push the items toward the learner, tell them to select one, provide brief access. I want you to pay attention to what the learner selects and what the technician does after the learner selects that item. Here we go.
Pick one. My turn. Thank you.
What did the learner select? What item? Oh, use the Q&A function. Okay, the worms or the stretchy snake? Great. Okay. What did they do after the learner selected the worms? Good, Gail. Terry, great. All right. They removed the items from the array. What should they do next? Collect data. Very good. And then after that? Oh, before they run the array, randomize the items so that they're ready to represent. Never waiting, never keeping the learner waiting. They have that preferred item in hand. All right, great. Good. Let's look at the next trial. All right, now in this trial, the worms were selected. Those are put to the side. We don't replace it. Now the technician's going to do the next one. They're going to push the items forward, tell the learner to pick one, and allow brief access. Watch.
Pick one. Ooh, the tiles. My turn. Thank you.
All right, in the chat or in the Q&A, tell me, what did the learner select? Good, the tiles. What should the technician do next? After they select the tiles, after the learner selects the tile. Remove the items. Good, then what? Collect data. Good, then? Randomize the array. Excellent. All right. So I'm not going to keep going with this, but over subsequent trials, those questions, they start to fade out. Okay. My goal is to get them to start using some of the language of the steps they're going to now implement. Demonstration is ended, and now I'm moving over to guided practice. Here's a novel example, okay, with a different learner. Fill out your data sheet. When we run this preference assessment, you've got three main zones. You've got the place you put your data sheet, you've got the place where you're going to set the array, and you've got a zone where you put the item, you store the items between trials. Here we go. Here's the first trial. Check that all 5 items are in the array. And now, if we were doing this in person, I'd be looking around. Everybody's doing it together at the same time. Push the items forward. Go. Tell the learner to select one. The learner selects the ball. Provide brief access. Follow the next steps. Okay. Through that set of questions, I start fading them out. That guided practice continues until I see people are getting faster and better at implementing the steps without hesitation. And then boom, I move to my test component. And now we're going to do a brand new novel example with different stimuli. And in this test component, what we're going to do is you're going to turn to another tech in the training and you're going to implement it. Okay. We've got two people who are going to role play. The benefit of taking this approach, what people often do is set people into the role play. They'll do a demonstration or an explanation and then set people into a role play to practice. And you do want people to practice, but the guide step is very important. And if you don't, you'll have groups that you have to go stand over and hover next to the entire time they're implementing the assessment, while other people are making errors that you're not going to catch. And then you wonder why. Why can no one do this assessment with a real learner? Okay. So those early experiences are very important. That might be what's part of your very first professional development unit on that topic. Then when we come back to a morning meeting, we can do a verbal review, okay, about what did we learn in the preference assessment. Let's talk through the steps. Let's do one of my favorite games, whip around or pass. I'm going to call on Maddie. Maddie's going to give me an answer the next step. That I'm going to call on Terry, and Terry's going to give me the next step. And I'm going to keep moving around the circle till everybody gives me an answer. If someone doesn't have an answer, we pass on them. And at the end of the game, we whip around and they go again. Okay. It's a good way to do a verbal review of what we just learned in that PD event. Then the next week, I might do it again in the supervision meeting. This is another opportunity to practice. Okay. And then we're ready to go and try it out on client cases. Okay. And get continual feedback and more opportunities to extend and practice and build as we go to the next case example or the next professional development experience, which might be prompting. And how do we know we're going to focus on prompting? Because again, we asked people, we looked at client data, we looked at procedural fidelity data, we did clinical walkthroughs, okay? And we noticed there's a lot of prompt dependency and very few people, if any, were using prompt delays. So that might be something we want to focus on. So here's an example for that next month's professional development event. What might I focus on? I might say that given a program where we've got either a physical or vocal prompt represented in the hierarchy, the technician can use a 2, 4, or 6-second prompt delay. And they modify that delay interval by using a rule of 2, meaning that 2 consecutive trials at that prompt delay, if the learner emits a correct response, then we fade to the next level. Okay? Again, I'm going to follow my sequence. This time, the very early professional development experience might be, shameless plug, it might be ProTech, our product, where we have a whole course sequence of short micro learnings on prompting. Learners are going to go through a set of an online 15-minute segment where they're going to get some practice. There's going to be demonstration. It's going to tell them about prompt delay, let's say, or in this example, 3-step prompting. Okay. They're going to get some of that early up front. They're going to get to practice taking data on a video example and submit those data to get feedback from the online system before we go and have them practice that skill or review that skill in supervision meetings or in morning meetings or wherever it might be. And when we do those supervision meetings or we go into practice and we have them implemented with clients, boom, we've got a supervisor handbook there that provides some of those guide steps. What should you do? How do you extend this skill with technicians? How do you get them to apply it on the job? What questions do you ask? What considerations are there about how much freedom you give them or how much restriction or guidance you provide? Okay. So all of those are, that's an example where we use some asynchronous learning. That way we don't have to coordinate an in-person event, but then everyone, when they're on their break or their lunch break or, when they've got some admin time, they can complete this 15, 20-minute lesson. And now we can all come back together. And when we come back together, everyone's got a good starting baseline. And that's where we're going to start now doing our distributed practice. And by the way, we have supervisors go through that training as well. So we are all using the same language. We know what is the entry repertoire for people who are going to come into the distributed practice opportunities. Okay. Then we apply it on the cases, and then we try to extend as much as we can in actual practice. All right. So those are two examples, one that uses primarily an instructor-led training, that MSWO, as the main modality for delivery, and the second one that uses a mix of modalities in there. But what I hope you got from today is that there are ways to meet the PD requirement from the BACB and create an effective experience. They're not mutually exclusive. Okay. And to create an effective experience, it's something that involves several ingredients. Okay. If you want people to be competent and confident in what they're doing, if you want them to achieve those outcomes you've set for them and your clients. All right. So if you want to talk more about your professional development program, ways that you can strengthen it or build it from scratch, encourage you to reach out for one of those free learning consults. We encourage you to sign up for interest in that clinical leaders community that's coming out very soon, and reach out if you're interested in 40-hour training or pro tech. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope that this has been valuable to you in some way, that you've gotten something that's going to help you meet those 2026 requirements. And it's September, then there's October, then November, then December, and then January 1 when 2026 goes into effect. So get started if you haven't already. And thanks so much for being here.